Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Merci d'être ici avec nous aujourd'hui. I'm Goran Pesek, Deputy Summit Chair and President and CEO of Samuel Associates and Executive Chair of the Policy Insights Forum. We are very pleased today to welcome you to the Digitalization of Defense and Security Summit, both online and in person here in Ottawa, Canada. We're also delighted to be collaborating with our summit partner, Canadian Defense Review magazine, and its publisher, Brett Kitchen. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce our summit moderator, who will guide our discussions over the next 2 days, Lieutenant General Retired Michel Maisonneuve. General Maisonneuve, please take the podium. La parole est vous.
Merci beaucoup, mon cher Goran, et félicitations à toi, Samuel Associates et Canadian Defense Review magazine pour ce sommet qui promet d'être très intéressant. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs, ici à Ottawa et aussi virtuellement de plusieurs autres endroits. On behalf of Goran and Brett Kitchen, publisher of Canadian Defense Review magazine, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this Policy Insights Forum, a 2-day summit on the digitalization of defense and security. It's my honor to be facilitating this event today. J'ai servi au sein des Forces armées canadiennes comme officier de l'arme blindée pendant 35 ans, puis j'ai été nommé directeur des études ou recteur du Collège militaire royal de Saint-Jean, où j'ai servi pendant plus de 10 ans. Notre événement aujourd'hui et demain s'avère être une initiative permettant l'étude de la digitalisation de la défense et de la sécurité et d'échanger sur le sujet. De cette façon, nous espérons encourager une plus grande collaboration entre les gouvernements alliés par une meilleure coopération en matière de défense, de sécurité, de numérique et de cybernétique, afin de relever les défis stratégiques de demain. Nous entendons aussi comparer l'approche prônée par les entreprises civiles qui font également face à la digitalisation. Ceci sera notre but pour demain. The aim of our summit is to bring together Western political, military, and industry leaders to discuss the convergence of digital and cyber technologies and their effect on the defense and security of countries and private business. At this moment, disruptive technologies are transforming the geopolitics of liberal Western democracies and affecting economies and business everywhere. Strategic competitors such as Russia and China are devoting more time and efforts to operations in this current and new domain. Since no nation or organization has complete dominance over cyberspace, it's critical for international peace, security, and economic stability that country and business leaders address emerging threats within the cyber domain. So today we will examine the approach taken by NATO and different countries, while tomorrow's session will allow us to study the impact on private industry. We see the impact of the digital domain occur every day. In the political military realm, nations and NATO are creating organizations and publishing key policies to deal with the cyber domain. Physical maneuver on the physical battlefield has been joined by the importance of digital and information maneuver on the digital battlefield. Evidence of the threat from state and non-state actors is conclusive. China and Russia in particular are constantly testing digital and cyber defenses and developing disruptive technologies. Individuals can affect supply chains and influence social activities. According to Statistics Canada, there were over 63,000 instances of cybercrime reported to police in 2020 in our country, which is a 267% increase since 2016. Events such as text-email corruption, ransomware, financial information compromise, and consumer and business attacks. One of the advantages of cyber operations is the relative low cost of intervention. This provides the ability to, quote, refine a low-cost toolkit that allows the bolstering of other authoritarian regimes to amplify illiberal voices in established democracies, poison information ecosystems, and subvert elections and other democratic institutions, unquote. The subject is topical, and it is important. Our guest speakers today and tomorrow will help us better understand the threat, their approach to dealing with it, and hopefully project the future so that we can be best prepared. So we'd like to thank our title sponsors, NATO and Thales, our sponsors Calian, General Dynamics Mission Systems, Dafocom Solutions, and Neptune, and our technology partners Modest Tree and Distantly. Thank you for your support in making this important summit happen. Merci à nos commanditaires. Alors, comme vous l'avez vu sur notre programme, celui-ci est bien rempli et nécessitera donc une discipline robuste pour assurer la participation appropriée de tous nos participants. As you can see from our very full program, our time is limited, and we will need to be disciplined in our interventions to ensure all speakers have appropriate time to make their remarks. This is the only polite way to ensure we do not run over time and constrain our subsequent speakers. Now, there's a couple of changes to the program this morning. The keynote remarks by the Deputy Secretary General of NATO have been replaced by an interview I conducted with him 2 days ago. We want to thank the Deputy Sec Gen for making himself available for our summit. Also, although we had invited Ms. Anne Neuberger, who is in a new position at the National Security Council dealing specifically with cybersecurity, and if you didn't think it was important, that's another great example. We invited her both through the Embassy of Canada in the U.S. and the U.S. Embassy in Canada, and directly through the White House, but regretfully she was unable to join us today. So on with the Deputy Secretary General. Monsieur Mircea Joanna a été nommé secrétaire général délégué en octobre 2019 après une brillante carrière nationale et internationale. He is the first Deputy Secretary General from Romania and the first from any of the countries that joined the alliance after the end of the Cold War. Dr. Joanna studied at the Polytechnic University in Bucharest, the Faculty of Law of the University of Bucharest, the École Nationale d'Administration in Paris, and he holds a PhD from the Economic Studies Academy of Bucharest. He has served as a diplomat and as a politician and has held a number of international positions, including OSCE chairperson in office in 2001. He has published extensively on domestic and international affairs. Il parle couramment le français, l'italien, l'espagnol et bien sûr l'anglais. L'impact de la digitalisation de la défense et de la sécurité a été réitéré l'été dernier lors du sommet des chefs de gouvernement et d'État de l'OTAN en juin. Le paragraphe 32 de la déclaration du sommet en parle directement. The NATO Summit Declaration of June states, and I quote, "Cyber threats to the security of the alliance are complex, destructive, coercive, and becoming ever more frequent," unquote. At that summit, NATO heads of state and government agreed the NATO Comprehensive Cyber Defense Policy. It was therefore an honor to discuss these topics with Deputy Secretary General Joanna.
No one knows what happens next, what the future holds,
which events will shape us,
and which will test our resolve.
Times have changed, you see.
People too.
We need to stick together if we're going to make it through. Sticking together means an alliance of minds and hearts, a collection of individuals greater than the sum of its parts.
People of all different kinds, with different sets of skills that come together and align. Because freedom is what matters.
It is why we must stand tall, and it's why we always tell them,
all for one, and one for all.
Alors, bonjour, Monsieur le Secrétaire général délégué. Merci beaucoup d'avoir accepté de nous parler aujourd'hui en préparation de notre sommet sur la digitalisation de la défense et de la sécurité. Thank you very much for taking the time to answer some questions, and I guess we'll go right into it, Mr. Joanna. Our summit today and tomorrow is going to bring together Western political, military, and industry leaders to discuss the convergence of digital and cyber technologies and their effect on the defense and security of NATO of countries and of private business. As we've seen, disruptive technologies are transforming the geopolitics of liberal Western democracies and affecting economies and business. Strategic competitors such as Russia and China are devoting more time and effort to operations in this new and current domain. So from your point of view, how does NATO see these emerging threats within the cyber domain?
Tout d'abord, merci pour l'invitation. Toujours heureux d'être avec nos alliés, amis canadiens. You're right, General. The threat from new technologies, including cyber, is real and significant. And the pandemic, we also have seen unprecedented number of people that have been doing more or less everything online. So malicious cyber activities target our people, as you mentioned, our businesses, and ultimately our societies, especially open democratic societies like ours. And they undermine the trust in democratic processes and institutions. So we have seen also during the pandemic ransomware attacks on hospitals and other healthcare services, including in the Czech Republic or France or Germany. We all remember vividly, and we still process the implications of the attack on SolarWinds, led to backdoor inserted into a huge number of companies and government agencies around the world. Also in Canada, just last week, a significant data breach was reported with one official colleague, I quote, the largest cyber attack in Newfoundland and Labrador's history, and among the largest in Canada. So cyber threats and new technologies are introducing a world where NATO, as the number one alliance in human history, we are basically, in a way, called to adapt, to adjust, and act. Because the complex, destructive, coercive implications of technologies and cyber are becoming more frequent. In a way, it's a sort of a new normal in its abnormal way. As our societies and our militaries depend on this digital framework, it is vital that we all do anything we can to secure our networks and digital infrastructure. Because you have rightly described in your presentation, General, that the convergence between digitalization and cybersecurity technologies is something which is very much to my heart. I chair in NATO on behalf of Secretary General Stoltenberg the Innovation Board in NATO. I'm also running the cyber adaptation effort here in NATO. And just recently, we have adopted a new AI strategy. Our defense ministers adopted just 2 weeks ago the first AI strategy when it comes to NATO. So EDTs is something that something is very much with us. Let me bring back a little bit of history on how NATO has started to look at cyber very, very attentively. So we have declared in NATO cyber as an operational domain, and you, with your track record in the leadership of NATO on our military side, you know this very well, the significance for NATO to declare cyber as an operational domain back in 2016 at the NATO summit in Warsaw. And ever since, we have continued to adapt. We are now preparing a cyber defense strategy. Some nations, like Canada, are also offering to NATO some of their national assets on cyber. And we are working on a continuum on the way to the next NATO summit in Madrid in June of next year into a comprehensive transformation and a roadmap for NATO to be up to the task of doing a few things to resist and quickly recover from any cyber attack. You all know, and probably the ones viewing our interview also do know, that our leaders have also decided that a severe cyber attack could be interpreted under the Article 5 rubric, which means that we have to make sure that this continuum of threats is very well managed by us here in NATO. So how to deter, how to defend against, and how to counter all these threats is something very much we do here at NATO. So resilience of our cyber defenses, resilience of our critical infrastructure, resilience of our supply chains, reducing vulnerabilities is something that we do. And let me say something about digitalization and the future. It is clear that new technologies are changing the very essence of warfare in a way and in a speed like never before in history. So as also our militaries will rely on this digital backbone in order to do what we are supposed to be doing, to protect against any threat from any direction, from any actor. The 1 billion people living in the 30 allied free democratic nations in NATO. This means that we'll have to work not only across a 360 geographical distribution of threats, and we see many of those coming from multiple directions, but also across domains. So to work across domains, air, land, sea, cyberspace, and space, which was also recognized in 2019 as the 5th operational domain, we'll have to have in NATO, and our militaries will need, a digital backbone. This means that we have to redouble our efforts to protect against cyber attacks and malign attempts to disrupt the way in which we run the business of defending our peoples. So I'm very happy that you asked this question, because the intersection between cyber and digitalization is probably, if you want, the essence of this transformative process that NATO is embarking upon, and where countries like Canada and all the other allies are doing lots of things. You also develop as Canada, and we're watching this with great interest, and we support this and encourage our great ally in Canada to develop its cyber capacities. The Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, launched in 2018, is already world recognized. We also appreciate a lot that Prime Minister Trudeau highlighted the fact that Canada would provide cyber effects to NATO. So this is something that we have to do as an alliance. And I close in saying that we know, this is not new, but this is with us even more intensely than ever before, that we are as strong as our weakest link. So that's why we have to make sure that all allies, big and small, more, let's say, stronger economically, and sometimes a little bit less, that we enhance our resilience to cyber threats across the board, across the 30 ally nations.
Thank you. And obviously the heads of state and nations see this as important, because I guess it was discussed at the summit in June and was part of the declaration from the summit. And so how can NATO encourage nations to do this, to react to these threats?
Listen, we've been doing what we call the cyber pledge exercise in NATO since 2016, when I mentioned that cyber was declared, and we are working with cyber as an operational domain in NATO. This means that on an annual basis, allies are, on a voluntary basis, they are measuring themselves against a set of requirements on cyber defense and cyber resilience, a process which is very, very rewarding for all allies, the larger one, the ones in North America, the ones here in Europe. And this is a way for us to have a growing common threshold for cyber resilience, cyber defense, and cyber adaptation. We also do something which is quite interesting. We organize on an annual basis the largest cyber exercise in the world. Why we do this? First of all, because we are 30 nations, so that's already a lot of nations that are working together, but also because we work with NATO's partners. You mentioned the international rule-based order. We are the most important and successful alliance and powerful alliance in human history, but we know that we have to enhance with like-minded nations, with other democratic nations, with countries that can bring their expertise in a two-way street with NATO ever closer together. I remember vividly one of our many exchanges and intelligence sharing with I give you an example. Our NATO Asia-Pacific partners, what we call the AP4, South Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, on cyber threats. So this is also helping us not only across the Atlantic, in Europe and North America, but actually around the world, to build a shared strategic awareness and also together to enhance our deterrence. So that's massive work, and we are committed in continuing on the way to our next NATO summit. You mentioned the last summit we had in June here in Brussels, but we have a very ambitious agenda that our Madrid summit in 2022, our leaders will adopt even more comprehensive, ambitious, and forward-looking cyber defense strategy.
Excellent. And so one of the things that we're going to discuss tomorrow at our summit is we'll gather a panel of industry leaders to seek their views on digitalization and the threat to private business. What is the NATO approach to relations with private industry in defending digitalization infrastructure and critical assets?
NATO is an alliance of democracies. So engaging with our own societies, with public sector, with private sector, with academia and civil society is of the essence. Also, we have to take into account that in the last few decades, most of the innovation, most of the technologies are today produced not only in governments or in public institutions, but when it comes to new technologies, I think that more than 80% are invented and put on the market by the private sector. So if we want to harness the number one competitive advantage of our alliance when it compares to nations that are proposing more authoritarian or totalitarian approaches on how to organize human societies, we are in a way called, obliged, and eager to engage with our private sectors. From a practical standpoint, because they produce most of the technology that we are also using in defense and security, but also because we need to educate each other on the needs that we have, and also to be of help in trying to encourage the private sector to also look into account on issues that are the responsible use of new technologies when it comes to AI or big data or quantum computing or biotechnology. This is why we also work with private sector in all 30 nations. I mentioned that I'm chairing the innovation board in NATO. We do this on a very constant basis. You served in Allied Command Transformation in Norfolk as Chief of Staff a few years ago, General. So you know that we also have a strategic command on new technologies. They are also engaging with private sector. Our specialized agencies are also working with the private sector. And this week we'll be organizing in Rome the NATO Industry Forum, when many of the defense and technology firms will be present and will be engaging with us at the top level of the alliance. Let me say just one word, because in having this innovation ecosystem between public, private, and academia in NATO countries, I mentioned, I believe, and this is a fact, is our number one competitive asset in comparison with our competitors. But we also have to harness the issues that are put by other partners, other than nations, like the European Union. European Union has developed a toolbox of instruments that are very useful. A number of allies are also member states of the EU. I'm also working, and NATO is working also the UN. I was just in Geneva, the agencies that are there that are working on standard setting. And we have to make sure that the norms, the standards, and hopefully universal legislation around new technologies and international norms could and should be developed, having at their heart also if you want, the commercial interest of the private sector, but also the values and the ethical thrust that we have to embed in everything we do. And I'm very proud, as I mentioned, that NATO is one of the first big important international organizations that have developed this AI strategy. And if you pay a little bit of attention and you read the AI strategy from NATO, you'll be seeing probably for the first time the recognition of responsible use and also the recognition of the ethical norms when it comes to the security applications of AI and big data. So we need the private sector. We engage with the private sector, and I think we will be in the position to do even more in making sure that we are aligned in sync. And also our new, if you want, transatlantic initiatives on new technologies, Diana, the Defense Innovation Accelerator for North Atlantic, that will have one regional headquarters in North America, another one here in Europe, are also trying to do just that, to create for the private sector, also for the SMEs, for the promising startups, a place where they can use our testing centers of NATO allies, some of our sandboxes, and also to allow them, in a way, minimizing the cost of failure and optimizing the successful technologies. And on top of that, we are also launching a NATO Innovation Fund that will be also helping these companies that have bright ideas for dual use and make sure that we nurture the talent of the private sector, which is the number one asset of what we have as open societies and democratic societies in NATO and in the democratic world.
Dr. Joanna, you're actually answering questions before I pose them. I like that very much. Let me just kind of finish with one of my particular, what I think is one of NATO's greatest accomplishments, and that is interoperability. And you mentioned standards. NATO's always been a champion of interoperability, in my view, and all nations, even those that do not belong currently to NATO, tend to use NATO standards for their operations and tactics. And what's so then to close off, how do you see the importance of interoperability in the digital domain?
You're so much right, General. We are such a successful alliance because of our values, because of our shared interests, but also because we can work, exercise, plan, and act together. So interoperability is, if you want, the essential part of what we do. So it's very clear that as we are moving into the adoption of new technologies in the way in which we conduct the business of keeping our 1 billion people safe against any threat from any direction, from any domain, we'll have to make sure that we keep interoperability very much on the agenda, because we have to recognize not all allies have the same depth of their innovation ecosystem, the same depth of their financial and venture capital markets, or the same depth or endowments of their universities. That's a fact. And that's the beauty of NATO. Because through our defense planning processes, through our exercising together through Diana, as I mentioned, and to many other things that we do, we are making sure that all allies are today and tomorrow able to operate, function, deploy, and God forbid, fight together. So this is why the adoption of new technologies across the board is something which is so important. This is why our military leaders are working on a specific new technologies strategy that is already on the way towards implementation. So when we speak about NATO, you know, when it comes to security, NATO is the gold standard when it comes to defense and security. And we are very much keen in keeping interoperability and making sure that not only NATO, but also many of our partners, as you mentioned, General, they're adopting, even short of a partnership with NATO, our way to do command and control, to prepare for exercises, to train their military and security forces, because NATO is the gold standard. It is the utmost ambition and obligation of us here in NATO to make sure that interoperability remains the core ingredient for making sure that all 30 allies and our militaries will be able also in the future to act together as one, as Article 5 says, one for all and all for one.
Well, Deputy Secretary General, thank you so much for your time. And I'll just close off by reminding our panel and our folks that you recently participated in the 10th GoTech World Conference, and your words at that time spoke about the importance of bytes in big data, which has become as great as bullets and battleships. And so I thank you very much. Je vous remercie beaucoup d'avoir pris le temps de nous parler aujourd'hui et au plaisir de vous rencontrer un moment. Merci beaucoup.
Merci à vous et bonne chance à votre très importante conférence. Thank you so much and look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you very much, sir. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank the Deputy Secretary General for his remarks in opening this summit. He gave us many overarching concepts that help set the scene for our discussion. He talked about the importance of protecting, of resilience, and response and adapt to the new menace. He talked about going across domains, air, land, sea, and space, and adding the digital background to these domains now. He talked about the intersection of cyber and digitalization, about the alliance helping nations that are larger and smaller that can actually benefit from all these advances, exchanges of capacities. He also talked about the other non-NATO nations which are also interested in partnering and engaging, and talked about engaging with the private sector, and we'll discuss that specifically tomorrow. He talked about the efforts they're making with the EU, the UN, developing standards. He talked about the artificial intelligence strategy that looked at responsible and ethical use of AI. And of course, interoperability, which is an absolutely essential part of what the Alliance does. So thank you very much to the Deputy Secretary General. Alors maintenant, nous allons procéder avec nos collègues des nations invitées. Et comme vous l'avez vu dans le programme, nous avons l'honneur d'accueillir des représentants de 4 nations alliées qui nous feront part de leur approche concernant la digitalisation de la défense et de la sécurité. The detailed biographies of our guests can be found at the Policy Insights Forum website where you registered for the summit. Nevertheless, I will briefly introduce each speaker before their presentation. Then they will provide about 10 minutes of opening comments. At the end of their opening statements, we'll have a short break to be followed by a roundtable where the participants will field questions we received from our audience when they registered for the summit. Our next speaker, I guess our first speaker, is Major General Jürgen Setzer, who is Vice Chief German Cyber and Information Domain Service and Chief Information Security Officer of the Bundeswehr. General Setzer joined the Bundeswehr in 1980 and graduated in computer science in 1984. He completed the German as well as the American General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth. His assignments included Battalion Commander, Chief of Staff Division Special Operations, Commander Air Mobility Brigade, Chief of Staff Army Command, and Commander Strategic Reconnaissance Command. Major General Setzer served in out-of-area missions in Bosnia-Herzegovina, Kosovo, and Afghanistan, and most recently as Regional Commander North ISAF. Herr General Setzer, willkommen.
Thank you for the introduction. I'm glad and honored to be here and have the chance to address this distinguished audience. My first question is, because I have a poor line, if you can hear me.
Hear you and we can see you.
Okay. As I said, I'm very glad to have the chance to address the audience. I would like to present you the German perspective and approach to the questions of digitalization of armed forces. From the very beginning, 5 years ago, we considered 3 aspects in our armed forces to be relevant in the context of digitalizing military forces. The first one, the electromagnetic spectrum. The second one, cyberspace. And the third one, on the same level, the cognitive layer of the information environment. Or in other words, the data highway its infrastructure, the signs and signals on the highway, as well as the drivers on that highway, belong together and need to be addressed as such. So all relevant units and capabilities have been put under the roof of this CID command. CID stands for Cyber and Information Domain. Under this roof, CID command in Germany, this includes IT and cyber units, electromagnetic warfare, strategic reconnaissance, and PsyOps and InfoOps capabilities. It includes mainly strategic and operational assets, leaving the very tactical assets for the famous last mile within the responsibility of the traditional services. With a functional view, the CID command consists of two columns: CID operations and digitalization. The operational column plans and conducts CID operations, i.e. operations in the electromagnetic spectrum, in the cyberspace, and also in the information operations field. Precondition for all these is situational awareness in those three areas. CID operations can be standalone or in the broader context of joint operations. My personal view on this is standalone CID operations without conventional warfare is a realistic assumption, also below the threshold of armed conflict. Pure conventional warfare without involvement of the CID is more and more unlikely. I come to the digitalization column of our command. It emphasizes the role of the CID in making effective and efficient use of digital technologies for the forces. The CID command is the driver of the digitization process for the Bundeswehr via concepts, guidelines, framework, architecture for the IT systems, planning, development, and procurement of CID relevant capabilities. This approach will be achieved under the umbrella of the CID command in a so-called system house CID. And that's a new approach for our armed forces. And it's, from my perspective, approach which has potential for the future. With respect to cyberspace, the CID has its place in the overall cybersecurity architecture of Germany. The cyberspace is complex by nature and cross borders, physical borders, as well as conceptual delineations. The distinction in international security and external security between military and civilian is blurred in the cyberspace. Except for a few examples, there are usually no separated ecosystems within the cyberspace. We all, civil and military, agencies, industry, and you name it, use the very same cyberspace, its infrastructure. That's why it's worth in regard to cybersecurity, and it's so important to get all the relevant actors together. And conferences like this one today are so important. Thus, Germany set up a national cybersecurity strategy in 2011 and updated it twice in 2016 and 2 months ago in 2021. 3 main roles are included. Cybersecurity, the leading Ministry of Interior. Cyber diplomacy, the leading Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And cyber defense, the leading Ministry of Defense, and there our CID command. The major coordinating body is our National Cyber Defense Center, which is across all the ministries of our country. Facing hybrid threats, the coordinating body is of utmost importance. The exchange of the current cyber threat picture is the baseline for coordinate action over all relevant agencies. But this threat needs not only a national answer, it needs an international answer. That's why for us, bilateral cooperation and cooperation in the framework of NATO and EU is so important. Therefore, I'm looking forward to our following discussion. Thank you for the chance to address the audience.
Thank you very much, General. Thank you very much for these remarks. So we're having some technical issues, but we're going to go right on to our Canadian presenter here today at this point. And then we'll come back to France and the UK, and hopefully we will be able to carry on. So our Canadian presenter, notre conférencier est Monsieur Stephen Burt, qui est sous-ministre adjoint Données, Innovation et Analytique. Monsieur Burt a rejoint la fonction publique du Canada en 1997 et le ministère de la Défense en 1999. He has held different portfolios in defense, the Privy Council Office, in operations, policy, and intelligence. His last appointment, actually, before this one, was as Assistant Chief of Defense Intelligence. Mr. Burt, thank you for being over here, and over to you.
Merci, Michel. Bon matin, tout le monde. Je vais offrir la plupart de mes remarques en anglais, mais si jamais vous avez des questions en français, n'hésitez pas. I should also note that I'm speaking for myself and not the government, as always in these things. I appreciate the opportunity to come here, appreciate the invitation to join all of you. It's always nice to put on a suit and see if it still fits after 2 years of COVID. The answer is sort of. It's nice to get out and see humans, so thank you for that. Looking at the list of presenters when I was talking to Michel and Goran about this, some pretty deep experts on cyber and technology issues. I'm going to take a slightly different tack on some of this. As was said, come this from a national security and intelligence perspective. I've been 3.5 years now on sort of data and innovation pursuits at the Defense Department. I want to talk about sort of 3 elements that I think are important for us as Canadians, as allies, to being able to act in the 21st century. The first of those 3 elements really does speak to my parish, and that's data foundations. I've spent, like I said, a little more than 3 years now trying to build up a data practice in the Defense Department for the Department and the Armed Forces. We've talked a lot for a long time now about data as a strategic asset. We still don't really treat it like one. We don't value it, we don't nurture it, we don't amortize it and figure out how we're going to use it in different places. And what I would say, reflecting on the remarks of the Deputy Secretary General, is that interoperability happens at the data layer. If we haven't got that piece right, we are going to struggle to do what we need to do in the kind of national security environment we find ourselves in. So we've got to treat data like it is a strategic asset, and that involves some fundamental changes in how we do our business, whether that is our corporate data around not just our money and our stuff, but how we get our stuff into the system, into our supply chain, get it out to the forces who need it, whether it's in our people issues and how we track people's careers from recruitment to retirement and how we make sure that they have the opportunities they need and have the services they need as armed forces members and families from us, or whether that's at the sort of the hard edge of military capabilities and what it is that we need to do with live streaming data off of platforms, whether they're flying, sailing, or on land. We need to build in interoperability at the data layer, and we need to be tech agnostic. I want to be able to lay on whatever tool I need in the moment on top of my data to do the thing that needs to be done, and I want to be able to do that fast. What we found in the last 3.5 years at Data Innovation Analytics, which I've stood up, is that this is hard work. It takes a long time, and it takes some big changes in mindset. And that's really the second element that I want to bring to the table today, about having an innovation mindset. Defense and security organizations, I have found over the last 25 years, have a fairly inherent small c conservative mindset. Strong culture of how we've always done things, And we generally need a crisis to change. COVID has actually offered us a crisis, and we've done pretty well, both as a Defense Department, as armed forces, and as a public service more generally. We have had more innovation in the last 2 years than we have had in the previous 15, I would say. The last big period of innovation like this, in my experience, was when we moved from Kabul down to Kandahar in Afghanistan and suddenly had to fight a war again. So that's been really good, perversely, from a digitalization standpoint. We've actually had to do a lot of things differently than we've done them before. I'm a little bit concerned that we have yet to have that crisis in a real national security context. At least Canada has yet to have that crisis in a real national security context. I appreciate that we've had many cyber incidents. We've had, going as well to the incidents the last couple of weeks in Newfoundland and Labrador, there are many sort of ongoing low-level issues. We've yet to actually get into a scrap with someone who has better, more agile, more innovative technology than we do. And I think when we do, we're going to have to turn to much more quickly than we realize. So what I would say on the innovation mindset is that that culture of how we've always done things pays a lot of dividends. It pays a lot of dividends from a unit cohesion standpoint. It pays a lot of dividends from the sense of how you sacrifice for each other, which is important in a crisis, but it's actually not good enough when you have to operate at the speed of technology, which is certainly the case in cybersecurity, but is increasingly the case in everything that we do. And the third element that I want to offer this morning, and I'm definitely not speaking for the Government of Canada on this, is procurement reform. And that's not entirely fair. I know there is a large audience within the Government of Canada that believes that this is the case. What's striking to me as a relatively new Assistant Deputy Minister in the Government of Canada is that as a senior exec in the public sector, the federal public sector, my primary accountability is actually about stewardship of public resources. That's good and proper. That's as it should be. We're dealing with taxpayers' money. We're dealing with people who, whether they're employees or armed forces members, who trust us to take care of them. We have many rules around how we do this stuff to ensure that we do it properly. And every time we have a problem, we put new rules on top of it. It's part of the culture as well. But technology procurement, as I'm sure many of you in this room will appreciate, requires speed and risk-taking beyond what current public sector controls allow. Fundamentally, what I see in the West, capital W, whether it's Europe or North America or other parts of it, around the globe, is that we are being lapped due to the democratization of technology and data. Not democratization, not in the sense that it's democratic, like we would like to think with a capital D, but democratization in the sense that everybody can have it in their pockets. I have 2 phones and a smartwatch on me, right? And the reality is that I can do things with those that were impossible at the state level 15 years ago. Individuals can do things that have state level effects and even global effects, and we can't keep up with the rule set that we've got. We need to be nimble to keep up. We need to be nimble to excel and maintain our current place. I think that the Deputy Secretary General is exactly right. We are the gold standard in NATO on how we do stuff. It is not divinely ordained that we will remain so forever. So how do we actually make sure that we maintain that? Now, I should also say this doesn't mean I'm going to buy all your stuff, right? So let's be honest here. I get 6 to 12 messages a week probably from various vendors who want to sell me something. And this goes back a little bit to what I was saying about the getting things right at the level of data. I want to be technology agnostic. What I do need, though, is sandboxes and an ability to test drive and experiment. And I know some of my colleagues in places like PSPC are putting together rules that will allow some of that, but we have yet to really test drive those rules, and there's a lot more that needs to be done in that space. So looking at digitalization, cyber issues, how we move faster in the defense and national security space, these are the 3 things that I'd ask you to reflect on and think about as we listen to the rest of our speakers here. So with that, mon général, I will turn it back over to you.
Merci beaucoup, Stephen. Thank you very much. That's very useful. Let's see if we can get our colleague from France online now, please. Mon général Montenot, est-ce que vous êtes en ligne et capable de nous entendre et de nous parler? Alors, nous vous voyons.
Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Oui, et on vous entend. Très bien. Alors, je vous ai déjà présenté, mais juste pour rappeler à notre auditoire que vous êtes un officier de l'arme blindée cavalerie. Plaisir de vous voir et que vous avez été affecté donc à plusieurs endroits et à l'ambassade en particulier de France comme attaché adjoint de défense et vous avez travaillé dans le cabinet du ministre de la Défense. Alors, mon général, à vous.
Merci beaucoup. Hello, everyone. Thank you, first of all, very much to Samuel Associated for organizing this summit and for inviting the French Cyber Command to it. We're very happy to be able to exchange and share some of our ideas on the given topic of the day. I would like to salute all the very distinguished speakers that you have brought together today, and also extend this French bonjour to the audience online in distance. Today I'm representing Major General Didier Tisser, who is the commander of the French Cyber Command, and speaking as his deputy. The main ideas that I would like to convey in this very short presentation is first that France continues to stand up its cyber defense capabilities while already operating them in around most of military operations, military deployments that France is conducting in Africa and in the Middle East, among other deployments. The second thing I would like to convey is that France clearly supports all international efforts that are being conducted to promote international cooperation in cyberspace. Will it be to clarify regulation of cyberspace, to build cybersecurity of allied operations, and to build exchange mechanisms, especially on how to exchange regarding the threats posed by cyber attacks. A few words on how we are organized in the French Cyber Command and for the French cyber defense at large. The first thing to mention is that cyber defense has been a standing priority for the French defense and security since roughly 2008, when we issued a new defense and security white paper. We established cyber as a priority. It has grown ever since and been confirmed by the current French administration. In 2018, we have issued a national cyber strategy which explains how we are organized today. And a characteristic of the French cyber defense is that it's very integrated cross-government. There is a national cybersecurity agency called ANSSI, Agence Nationale pour la Sécurité des Systèmes d'Information, which is the hub of the French cyber defense. It is placed under the Prime Minister of France, and it is responsible for providing cybersecurity to the French government and to some of the key players of the French economy. Everything ANSSI does for the government and for the French economy, we, the ComCyber, the French Cyber Command, do for the French Minister of Armed Forces. So we've been established 4 years ago, and we are placed under the orders of the French Chief of Defense, now General Burka, and we are responsible for two things: cyber operations and the future of cyber defense. Cyber operations that we do plan and conduct on a daily basis, we divide them into 3 lines of operation, and that probably will be described differently in other countries. So we conduct defensive operations, offensive operations, like most of our partners, but also influence digital operations or digital influence operations. So we support information operations with cyber operations. It's been made public recently by statements of our Minister of Armed Forces. For this, we've been given assets and funds and human resource. We consider that cyber defense is not very costly in terms of equipment, and we're counting that, for instance, it has a cost of around 1.7 billion euros over a period between 2019 and 2025. So not very costly in regards to the global defense budget of France, but it costs human resource for sure. And that's probably where the bulk of the French military effort is placed towards cyber. It's building the human resource for cyber defense. Within a period of 3 years, we intend to move from 3,500 to 5,000 cyber warriors inside the French military. So that's who we are and how we are organized. Maintenant, quelques mots sur la façon dont nous voyons la coopération internationale en Tout d'abord, il y a bien sûr les partenariats bilatéraux adverses et aussi la façon dont nous pouvons envisager de conduire des attaques cyber face à des adversaires communs. Mais bien sûr, ce sont des sujets qui sont peu partagés et nous ne sommes pas complètement intégrés avec un partenaire bilatéral. Nous avons des sujets d'intérêt en commun. Et puis ensuite, il y a les coopérations qui s'adressent à l'ensemble de nos partenaires alliés. Alors, je voudrais pointer quelques initiatives françaises qui sont importantes. Tout d'abord, l'appel de Paris pour la confiance et la stabilité dans le cyberespace lancé par le président Emmanuel Macron en 2018. Cet appel de Paris appelle notamment à la construction de normes et à la définition de l'application du droit international dans le cyberespace. Un grand nombre de pays nous ont rejoints et nous avons été heureux d'entendre la semaine dernière que le gouvernement américain compte soutenir l'appel de Paris. C'est une nouvelle très importante pour nous. Ensuite, nous participons dans le cadre des Nations Unies au groupe d'experts gouvernementaux qui réfléchissent à la régulation du cyberespace. Il y en a 2, nous participons à ces 2 groupes. Ensuite, la France dans le domaine cyber, la légitime défense, ce qu'était le seuil de l'agression armée et pourquoi nous pouvions considérer qu'une attaque cyber pouvait constituer une agression armée. Et puis nous avons aussi défini là-dedans comment la France considérait la due diligence en matière cyber. Peut-être qu'il y aura des questions là-dessus. Ensuite, bien sûr, il y a le cadre européen, et c'est un sujet d'actualité, puisque la France s'apprête à prendre pour 6 mois la présidence de l'Union européenne début 2022. Et dans le cadre européen, la France, en tant qu'État, bien sûr, soutient toutes les initiatives qui visent à la promotion de la cybersécurité entre les nations. Plus spécifiquement dans le champ militaire, nous comptons axer les 6 prochains mois sur le soutien aux documents de doctrine qui viennent d'être publiés par l'état-major de l'Union européenne. Nous comptons aussi faire la promotion du développement d'outils en commun pour assurer la défense cyber, notamment des opérations militaires conduites par l'Union européenne et notamment à travers un projet PESCO promu par l'Allemagne, dont nous sommes membres. Et puis enfin, nous attachons une grande importance à la connexion entre les CERT, la connexion entre les Cyber Emergency Response Teams militaires. Nous estimons que c'est comme cela que nous allons pouvoir être plus efficaces face à la menace. Et enfin, bien sûr, et ça nous concerne tous aujourd'hui, il y a le cadre de l'OTAN. Dans le cadre de l'OTAN, nous faisons partie des nations qui ont soutenu le Cyber Pledge de 2016, auquel faisait référence le secrétaire général adjoint en ouverture. Et puis nous soutenons le renforcement des capacités défensives de l'OTAN pour que l'OTAN soit une alliance véritablement cyber secure et cyber résiliente. Well, I'm going to stop here and thank you again for offering us the opportunity to communicate our vision of cybersecurity. And I'm looking forward to hearing from the other distinguished participants and answering to potential questions. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, General. Merci beaucoup, mon général. And as we can see, cyber is another part of our conference today that, and the digital domain does work when you persevere. Our last guest, therefore, is Air Vice Marshal Tim Neil Hopes, and we'll see if we can actually get him online. He is Director Cyber Intelligence and Information Integration at the UK Ministry of Defence. Air Vice Marshal Neil Hopes has served in a wide range of appointments, both in the UK and overseas. His career has spanned cybersecurity, intelligence, and information systems engineering, interspersed with tours supporting deployed operations. Educated as an electronic and electrical engineer, he also has a Master in Science, in Arts, an MBA, and a Master's in Philosophy, and he's authored a book on cyber power. He's continuing his doctoral studies in the subject. Air Vice Marshal Neil Hopes, welcome, and please go ahead. So we don't hear you and we don't see you. We'll just wait a moment and see if we can get him. I apologize for this contretemps. Perhaps while we wait, I can go ahead and give you a couple of thoughts on the three presentations we've heard so far and how, in fact, you look at the convergence of views on this between nations. And I mentioned earlier that nations are putting together specific organizations to look after cyber defense and security. And our German colleague, of course, talked about how they are centralizing the assets in this way. Our Canadian, Mr. Burt, talked about the importance of three things: data, its importance, the interoperability between data and the ability to use it quickly and well. He also talked about developing an innovation mindset. And of course, as he mentioned, this happens, you kind of develop it when you're in a crisis. And it happened in Canada from the physical crisis that we had in Afghanistan. But you don't want to be developing this during crises all the time. You want to try and have it available before the crisis actually happens. There's the Air Vice Marshal. Can you hear me, sir? We can see you.
Hi, can I just confirm whether anyone can hear me? I'm not getting anything from the main conference.
We can now hear you. We can now hear
Brilliant.
you, Air Vice Marshal.
My apologies, I'm not hearing the conference, so I'll kick off and like to just start and say thank you for inviting me to speak. You'll be relieved to hear that I'll do this in English only, as my French would absolutely make everyone's ears bleed, I promise you. And delighted to give the UK an MOD perspective. I think one of the challenges we collectively face is terms like digitization and cybersecurity are used very freely, particularly here in the UK, often without defining precisely what they are. So I think it would be absolutely right for me to define both the terms digitization and cybersecurity from a UK perspective before then sort of leaping in and explaining why they're important and how they're coming together. very much in the business change, business process space. So if we look at it from a technological perspective alone, we will fail to leverage the benefits that digitization brings us. So I think that's one of the big differences I'd like to highlight from a UK perspective between the convergence of digitization and cybersecurity, but also why they're very different. Because it will change the way our business is run. Just like Uber changed the way transport was done, Netflix changed entertainment, Amazon changed direct sales, so digitization, AI will fundamentally alter and automate so much of the military and security process. One challenge that I would say also that goes with terms like digitization is, and moving into the digital age, is to give the perception as well that the analog age is gone, and it simply hasn't. An awful lot of analog technology will still be relevant in the warfighting and security business. An electronic warfare attack whereby you overpower your adversary would be just as effective as a DDoS attack or a ransomware being launched against us. And likewise, we use the term digital age and we risk missing opportunities in the future, particularly challenging things like quantum sensing, quantum cryptography, and the like. So what's in a word? Digital can be quite dangerous, but if we get in the broader sense business change, then I think it's quite powerful for us. Then if I look at cybersecurity as a term, again, I use it in a very broad sense. So the idea is securing networks and IT that are in the internet or cyberspace. If I was to quote the Chief Executive Officer of our National Cybersecurity Centre, she would say that cybersecurity is actually national security. We are so dependent on cyberspace, and we will be in terms of prosperity and every facet of life that we have, that actually the two are solely, you cannot separate the two areas. But the danger is if you have such a broad term for cybersecurity that actually you don't define who is responsible for what. And I'll give an example of this. I was chatting with a chap called Professor Tom Ridd, and some of you may have read his works. And he put a challenge to me. He said, well, Tim, if my computer is hacked at night, and it's defender's responsibility to restore it. And I said, well, Tom, if your house was broken into, would you naturally look for the MOD and the military to come protect you? Surely that's a civilian responsibility. And therein lies the danger of not well defining cyber roles. And an awful lot is based upon who is the adversary that is actually trying to give malintent through cyberspace. So when we talk about cybersecurity, I think there's a really important facet from a UK perspective, which aligns with NATO doctrine as well, which is that cyberspace is the fifth domain of military operations and warfighting. And so that really is the role that I'm responsible for and really interested in. And then again, to allow us to get into a more deliberate, precise use of the language, there are 4 cyberspace types of operation that have evolved that have very clear responsibilities in the UK. The first is building a secure cyberspace. It is the only human-made domain. We inherit air, sea, land, and space. Cyberspace we forge ourselves. So network operations and building a secure environment is absolutely crucial in the first operation. Secondly is defensive cyber, making sure we have freedom of maneuver in and through cyberspace to make sure our air platforms, our maritime platforms and land platforms can operate freely. Third, one we often miss, it's understanding a very, very dynamic operating environment that is cyberspace. So cyber intelligence and cyber ISR is absolutely crucial as a third operational area. And the fourth is probably the shiny area that many people get oriented towards, which is offensive cyber operations. So they're the 4 roles that we see. And then if I look at that, how that then plays into responsibilities, each of those can be broken out across government. So if I'm looking at defending cyber or the standards to which we build cyberspace, those first 2 missions, I can quite clearly turn to the National Cybersecurity Centre in the UK and go, it's your lead, we follow that as defence and we will meet the standards that you adhere to. If I'm looking at Thomas Ridd's example and his computer being broken into, that's very easy. That's the National Cybercrime Unit's responsibility from a whole of government perspective. And then if I was looking at offensive cyber, from the UK perspective, we would look to the National Cyber Force, which is a joint intelligence agencies and defence initiative. So I think breaking down those roles in the way we have allows us to break down those responsibilities. And you can see also, therefore, where industry and our partners in civilian space would also plug into some of those areas. Lots of responsibility up front in terms of cybersecurity and building a secure cyberspace and observing what's going on in it, probably less so from the offensive side of the house. I would then like to just praise a few challenges that I see as a consequence of this convergence between cybersecurity and the pace of change of digitization. And the first is pace and scale. Both digitization and cybersecurity technologies are moving at an exponential speed and exponential growth. And we don't see that that's going to change. So I think it's not a technical challenge that faces us in this area. It's making sure the policies, permissions, and the skills of our personnel are absolutely up to speed there. So I put that as our #1 priority, actually, and the biggest challenge. You get the right people in this space, actually, they'll be able to deliver the technology in a secure and responsible fashion. Second, I think, is a tension between introduction of these technologies, new ways of working, and actually making sure that when they're introduced in a secure fashion. So if I was to look at industrial control systems and the fact that they can be engineered from afar to allow us to better secure our infrastructure, who would have thought at the outset of those technologies that they would be used by adversaries, and you would see things like the colonial challenge that the US suffered here, or the fact that enhanced cryptology which should make us more secure, is actually being turned back against us in widespread ransomware. So I think that reliance on new ways of working, but also understand the vulnerabilities, is really crucial. Linked to that, the third challenge we would see from a defence sector and security sector is that those new technologies are also levelers. Perhaps terrorist organisations that we would have seen in the past would not have had access to high resolution imagery that's now widely available from commercial sources, or the idea of secure communications with high-end cryptography associated with it are easily downloadable off the internet now. So that risk of technology proliferation is a particular challenge in both areas for defence and security. And the other challenge that I would highlight is that a threat to one now is a threat to many. And it's just impossible to say there's a UK security challenge on its own. If we're using systems employed by NATO, the weakest link in the chain will be able to take down every one of the NATO allies potentially. If I introduce an aircraft on a multinational basis, and again, a risk to one is a risk to all. So the challenge of technology, digitization, and cybersecurity means that we have to be more integrated, and we have to be integrated from the outset. And that takes me into my final challenge from the UK perspective of this area, is that we live in a world now that is 24/7 connected, which means that the challenge and the threats that we face in the world are 24/7 connected. And so that fundamentally changes the parameters of how we design our force structures, our ways of operating, the resilience that we have to have in place. And the simple fact is you can't wait until an incident to design those structures of how we're going to work together. So I think a challenge for us as a community, both the commercial sector and with our international allies, is making sure that we've got those relationships in place on a 24/7 basis, whereby we are ready to meet challenges of that constant contest that's there. So I'll pause at that point. Delighted to be able to join you, and I look forward to the rest of the panel.
Thank you very much, Air Vice Marshal. This was very, very interesting and gave us an excellent perspective. And so at this point, I just wanted to kind of give a bit of a summary and talk a little bit about the different perspectives that we've heard today before we go to break. And I would ask our panelists to please remain online, because we will be having questions and answers after our short break. So So I already talked about the German side of things and the Canadian side of things. On the Canadian side, there were three things: the data importance, the innovation mindset, and the third one was procurement reform, which was spoken about by Stephen Burt. On our French colleague talked about standing up the command at the same time as they're operating, and of course that reminded me very much of standing up Allied Command Transformation. It's not unlike changing tires on a moving vehicle. You need to continue to operate at the same time as you're actually organizing yourself. Very difficult. Our French colleague talked about the regulation of cyberspace, and that cyber has been a priority since 2008 for the Ministry of Defense of France and the government of France. And talking about not just the military, but they're integrating this across government completely. He talked, one of the first times we've heard this word, influence operations, which of course is the whole business of cyber and digital and international cooperation. He talked about the Appel de Paris, bilateral relationships, also relationships with NATO, the UN, and the EU, and France taking over the chairmanship of the chair of the EU, and developing tools. Our UK colleague, very interesting again, talked about the fact that this is a huge change using the digitalization, and that it's going to have a massive impact, automation, etc., that we need to integrate other initiatives, and the fact that cybersecurity is national security, and so that's very important, and I believe that that is indeed the case. He talked about the challenge of responsibility. Who's responsible for each of the in these domains, and in this fifth domain, who's responsible for doing what? Talked about new ways of doing the challenges, so new ways of doing business, new ways of working, new technology, technical proliferation, and the common threat, and integrating all these capabilities and the connections that are now 24/7 as opposed to during the work day. Very true, which will have an impact on force structure. So thank you to all four of our panelists. Very interesting, and certainly a lot of common ground here that we can actually use when we go to the questions and answers. So now we're a little bit ahead of time, but before we break, I'd like to highlight someone who is here with us today in Canada. In Canada, Remembrance Week was just this past week. And as we do every year, we had a chance to reflect, to remember, and honor all those who fought for our values and freedom, those who returned and those who did not, as well as all those who are serving today. From the defense of our values in the past, in the physical domain, we can learn to defend today and in the future in the digital domain. So we need to remember those lessons. Today, we're most honored to have with us a veteran of World War II, Professor Robert Spencer, who just turned 101 years young. Sir, if you'd come and join me right up here. So Professor Spencer was born in Montreal and educated at McGill University, Trinity College at the University of Toronto, and Oxford University. He joined the Canadian Officer Training Corps, the COTC, at McGill, and upon graduation in 1941, joined first the Victoria Rifles and then the Royal Canadian Artillery. He served with distinction in the 15th Canadian Field Regiment in France, in the Netherlands, and in Germany, and he was mentioned in dispatches in 1945. After the war, Dr. Spencer remained in Europe working for eminent Canadian historian Colonel Charles Stacey in the historical section, and then he returned to Canada in 1946 to continue his education. After receiving his doctorate in history from Oxford, he was appointed to the history department of the University of Toronto, where he taught and held many senior administrative posts for the next 35 years. Professor Spencer returned to uniform with the COTC contingent at the University of Toronto in the early 1950s, serving as one of the last commanding officers of the COTC before retiring in 1966. Specializing initially in German history, he became more engaged in international relations as the years passed. A member of the Canadian Institute of International Affairs from 1950 until the present, he co-edited the International Journal for 25 years. He was a member of the Atlantic Council of Canada, then its president, from 1990 to 1999. As vice president of the Atlantic Treaty Associations, he hosted the ATA's assembly in Toronto in 1995, ably assisted by his intern of the day, our own Goran Pešić. Dr. Spencer is the recipient of the Canadian Force Decoration, the Queen's Silver Jubilee Medal, and for his long-term efforts at promoting and supporting Canada's international relations with NATO and Germany, he was awarded the Goethe Medal in 1983 and the Commander's Cross of the Order of Merit of the Federal Republic of Germany in 1986. He's one of only 3 Canadian recipients of this award. Now in his 102nd year, Dr. Spencer lives in Ottawa along with 2 of his 3 children, and until the start of the pandemic, he visited the Global Affairs Library twice a week and has remained actively engaged in following Canada's foreign and defense policy developments. Dr. Spencer was married to Ruth Margaret Church for over 50 years. She was a Wren, a librarian, and his lifelong companion who died in 2000. Please join me in thanking and honoring Professor Spencer for his dedicated service in uniform and as a civilian to Canada and to society.
Thank you very much indeed. That's very good. I'm glad to be here. It goes back a long way, the early days of NATO. I remember it very well. They're a very important time, got things started and went on from there. So thank you very much for welcoming me here this morning.
Welcome, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a short break and come back in about 5 minutes. Yes, sorry. Oh, yes, we have a special presentation, sorry.
There you are. That tells everything.
It says a European affair.
It's a book of memoirs from Dr. Spencer.
Close to my heart. So thank you very much, Professor.
You're welcome indeed.
And thank you very much for bringing
Well,
your service to Canada all these years.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll now take a 5-minute break, ladies and gentlemen. Please come back in 5 minutes. And our panelists, please stay on the line. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. you might like our panelists to answer. We've collated these questions, and I will now pose them to our different panelists. I'll read the question first, and then designate who will answer first. And then I may also redirect the question to another panelist. And of course, we always start with the first question, which is the threat. And we've mentioned a number of times this morning that no nation or organization has complete dominance over cyberspace, so it's critical for leaders to address these emerging threats to North America, Europe, and the world. So how do you view the threat posed to your country? And we're going to start with Air Vice Marshal Neil Hopes. Tim, over to you.
Thank you very much. I would view the threat as real, present, constant, growing, multifaceted, and unfortunately for many, it's conceptual. The challenge with cyberspace is you can't reach out and touch it. It doesn't become real until it's too late. And I would also describe the threat as impacting on every facet of human behavior. There is little that is done in the real world that isn't replicated in cyberspace. So the threat is at state level in terms of threatening our national security. It's a threat from individuals who would wish to commit crime against us. And that doesn't matter if it's our National Health Service having ransomware against its management systems, or whether that's an individual's house having ransomware on their personal computer. The threat also is from serious organized crime, and that is growing. And that also gives us another challenge in terms of who the threat actor is, because there is that ability in cyberspace to obfuscate one's role, who one is. And so the threat is also the unknown proxy through which individuals are acting upon. A couple of other threats that I would suggest that are out there is, firstly, what I describe as the tyranny of the commons. We all see it as somebody else's problem and that somebody else will come along and fix it for us. And I'm afraid that's exactly the wrong answer. This is a collective problem, a collective challenge, and one that we all have to get after. And then the final threat, I think, is that of pace and the possibility of self-harm. I describe this as mortgaging our security of tomorrow as a consequence of securing business advantage today. And again, you do that at your peril. So I think that would be how I would describe it. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Tim. And I would like to see how Mr. Burt sees the threat from his side of the Atlantic, which is an interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah, thanks for that. The Air Vice Marshal is pretty thorough there in terms of the characteristics that he was describing. I guess I would add a couple in terms of characteristics, which would be dispersed and unpredictable. I think that, and he touched on it already, the ability of groups we have not yet heard of, and countries that are otherwise not very powerful, to reach out and affect us on these things is real. And it's hard to know from one day to the next what might come at you. So I think being able to, from a strategic perspective, being able to react in an adaptable and flexible way is becoming increasingly important, because it's very difficult to actually focus in a tactical way on a specific line of threat. I would add one more, and just riffing a little bit off of the issue of the commons. I think that at the end of the day, I'm a classics major and a classics and history major. I think that I'm worried about the capacity of our own populations to think critically about the information they are getting. I think we've seen that in spades in the last 3 to 5 years. And I think that the proliferation of technology makes that much worse. I don't think the capacity has changed. I think the information coming at people has changed, and we are yet to find a way to actually manage our democratic systems in a way that allows that that accounts for that proliferation of information.
Very interesting. Une deuxième question. Alors, on voit donc une vision des menaces liées à la convergence des technologies de numérisation et de cybersécurité. Êtes-vous d'accord en général avec cette vision et quelles approches votre gouvernement a-t-il adoptées pour réagir à ces menaces? Alors, Général de Montenot, and what I'm asking here is that there's a vision of the threat, and do you agree with this vision of the threat, and what approaches has your government adopted to react to these threats? Général de Montenot, à vous.
Thank you. Yeah, I very much agree with what was described by my British and Canadian colleague towards the threat. We would not describe it the same way, but the results would be the same. How we tackle it, I think I explained it a bit when describing the French approach. We try to have a cross-government approach. We try to make sure that there is a strong connectivity between the civilian side of the cybersecurity and cyber defense. And another actor that I did not mention is the private industry, and more specifically the one sensitive to defense. So defense contractors to us are part of the team. And recently we came up with an initiative by which we co-signed an agreement with the 8 major defense contractors by which they commit to more security in the development of weapon systems, so to build some type of security by design, and we try to support them as the government in this effort. But probably it's not enough. It's not enough to build robust cybersecurity, and for this we also need the international partnerships that I described earlier.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very useful and also very useful for us to think about tomorrow, how you've developed this partnership with these civilian technology firms. And what about you, Air Vice Marshal Neil Hopes, on your side, the reaction to the threat?
So the response, again, I would wholly agree with previous speakers. The response has to be three-faceted: international, cross-governmental, and then a whole of nation perspective. So international, it has to be our standardization and the standards that we put in place. Absolutely crucial. But also at that international level, because that challenge is unpredictable, it's instant, and it actually might be on your system before you, well, no, it will have been on your system before it's actually impacting upon you. Then having those relationships established in advance is absolutely crucial. So you see a growth in the multinational bodies that are helping us prepare for and get after this. Then at the national level, there's been a legion in terms of the numbers of national bodies that have been stood up to be prepared for and deal with the cybersecurity issue. So at the national level, National Cybersecurity Centre was established, bringing together academia, industry, critical national infrastructure, government departments, and particularly defence and the security sector there, to allow that instant information sharing, the selling of best practice. And possibly one of the most important things that the National Cybersecurity Centre has done is helped us to try to get after that educational challenge of allowing individuals in their homes to understand the threat to them, their behaviours, and be better prepared and better secure. It's allowed us to get after the national educational challenge of growing individuals with STEM skills at the scale that we need. It's allowing industry to be better prepared and to show that they have the best processes in place to then actually be able to go out there and compete for government contracts and critical contracts. And then you take it down into the individual discipline perspective. You see the establishment of bodies like the National Cybercrime Unit, particularly getting after the challenges, things like serious and organised crime. The National Cyber Force being stood up as a pan-governmental body. And then particularly each of the government departments have their own responsibility for their own industrial supply chains to make sure that those they're working with and that which they're supplied with is secure. So a very, very broad front of response, all at differing stages of maturity, I have to add. And actually, it's a dynamic response because the threat tomorrow will be different from the threat that we face today. So it's a constant challenge of keeping that lot synced together.
Thank you, Tim. That's very useful. And we've also heard from some of our speakers allude to this question of offensive operations as well on the digital domain. And so both on that point of view and in terms of generally rules of engagement that might be useful to be used in the digital domain, I would ask Mr. Burt to what these might be, these rules of engagement, these new rules of engagement, and how would they impact the international order? Stephen?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think the rules of engagement question is an interesting one. We probably all of us on this call have in our national security strategies or defense strategies or other documents some notion of appropriate human involvement in machine-driven decision-making. The reality is with the kinds of threat we're describing, which is sort of constant, it can be existential, but is also going on all the time at a lower level. You do need, particularly in defensive cyber, you need sort of AI-driven, machine learning-driven, automated responses because you simply can't react fast enough. So you need to be able, from a rules engagement standpoint, to sort of divide up the threat and figure out where you can trust the machines to do their thing with a little bit of oversight, and where you actually need to have a decision, a yes/no decision in terms of what kind of response you're going to deploy. Appropriate human involvement is a great phrase, and I think it's echoed in a variety of ways through the Western world. The challenge with it is that, well, there's a lot of wiggle room in terms of what's appropriate, and what's appropriate from a citizen standpoint is different from what's appropriate from a threat standpoint. So the rules we put around automated decision-making, for example, from the Treasury Board with regard to how we offer services to Canadians, have to be different from how we do automated decision-making in the defense space. And in the defense space, my worry is that appropriate human involvement only lasts as long as the other guy also ensures appropriate human involvement. And once they step away from that, it becomes very difficult to sustain because you actually have to allow your systems to move faster than you are able to keep up with. We are putting together, this is a bit of a unpaid advertisement here, we are putting together an artificial intelligence strategy for the Defense Department right now. My policy folks, in conjunction with the ADM policy people and the Defense Research and Development Canada, are looking at how we might actually put some rules around this that would be appropriate from a Canadian defense standpoint. But it's a challenging space from a rules engagement perspective.
Thank you. Je vais demander à la France de réagir aussi à cette question des règles d'engagement. Ask France to react to this question of rules of engagement. En général.
Yeah, no, if we discuss rules of engagement in relation to offensive cyber operations, we very much like the way discussions are being conducted in the framework of NATO, for instance. 2-3 years ago, a few countries, among which France, have actually pledged capabilities, offensive capabilities, that they could consider using in the framework of a NATO operation. And ever since, discussions have continued to define exactly how this could happen, whereas we would disclose the existence or the specificities of these offensive capabilities for the benefit of other NATO countries, and the common answer was no. It's a very sensitive topic, so we will not disclose exactly what we're able to do. But NATO and the NATO command structure has moved forward with the support of those countries that have pledged offensive capabilities, and is somehow building a doctrine around that. And I think that I do not imagine exactly that we are at the point of defining rules of engagement for the use of these capabilities, but I think that we first of all need to use a common legal framework. Define, for instance, what is self-defense when in regards to cyber attacks. There was mentioned by the Deputy Secretary General of the fact that some of the NATO members are considering using Article 5 in case of a cyber attack, saying that a cyber attack is an armed attack and should be considered so. Well, we should try and reach some type of agreement on these topics if we want to establish some robust rules of engagement. Over to you.
Okay, very good. And I saw my colleague there from the legal side was very happy that you mentioned the legal framework. Very good. And also, Jean de Monton mentioned some of the relationship they're developing with private business and kind of to set us up for the future. And we're going to look at this specifically tomorrow regarding private industry. Can you, Air Vice Marshal Neil Hopes, can you talk to us about what you think should be the relationship between your government and alliances, government and also industry to defend digitization infrastructure and critical assets? Go ahead, Tim.
I'd be delighted to, but if I could just set that off by also looking at the rules of engagement piece, because I think it's absolutely fundamental to answer the next question. And one thing I would iterate, and it's great that you've got a lawyer in the audience nodding at you. Many times have the lawyers told me what I can and can't do in cyberspace, and there is never an event whereby I haven't got legal authority or have gone through those checks and balances in advance of any operations. I would also add, though, that there's something fundamentally not different to the rules of engagement in the physical world to those in the virtual world. And if we see them as fundamentally different, and we don't hold ourselves to those higher standards we already set and that are well established, then I think there's a real danger in us moving forward. The biggest challenge that I do see in terms of the rules of engagement is that we have to be proactive. The pace of challenge that we're going to face in cyberspace demands that an awful lot of those rules of engagement have to be established well in advance to make sure they're appropriate. So, and then in terms of sort of the argument that Stephen talked to, that the challenge comes when AI is faced with AI and how do you respond? Well, the danger isn't necessarily that we have a race to the bottom in terms of our standards. Actually, what we need to do is make sure we hold ourselves to the highest possible standard and make sure that we are well prepared, all of us, to be able to share when standards aren't being upheld by other bodies, other nations, so we can try and establish those rules and norms in the international space. So that takes us into sort of the relationship with industry. And the automation piece is a fascinating facet to it, because the standards that we're held to from a governmental perspective, a military perspective, a security perspective, strangely, may not be the standards that necessarily an industrial counterpart would look at holding themselves. Could it be that industry becomes the soft underbelly in terms of our legality, because they perceive they've got greater freedom of maneuver in terms of us being able to subcontract with them in automation of defences and the like? So that's why I see a huge synergy between the rules of engagement and the private sector behaviours, because we actually need to make sure all of those are being held to the highest possible standard. Then when it comes specifically to critical national infrastructure, I think a really close relationship between those parts of our national infrastructure and the government departments that are specifically responsible for it have to be crucial. And again, the challenge here I see is that each of those parties looks to the other and says, well, the solution is in your space, not mine. And actually the answer is exactly the inverse. It's in both of their spaces. So the challenge for us in terms of that private sector cooperation, it has to be far closer, it has to be far more dynamic, and also we've got to be far more open with each other, because a threat to one is a threat to all of us. and one company or one part of the infrastructure being threatened by a critical national infrastructure threat is probably likely to surface somewhere else. So a safe environment whereby we can share those threats, government can share the high threats with our industry partners, but also industry feels secure enough that they can step forward and go, we've experienced this, we need your help, and government have a mechanism whereby industry then have trusted agents to go out there and buy them capacity to get after that threat and resolve it. I think they're the key relationships that I would look at in terms of the cooperation. Far closer, far more trusting, far more open, but in a fashion that doesn't ultimately hit industry's margins, and particularly its share price, but also they don't do that at the cost of our national security.
Yeah, very interesting. And when you refer to them as a possible soft underbelly, it makes me think also that their freedom of action also make them more resilient, more capably resilient than our systems or the government systems eventually. And you've made General Pitzel, our favorite lawyer, very happy, continuing to mention the legal aspects of this. But I want to ask Stephen Burt about in terms of the Canadian relationship with industry. Stephen, can you say a few words to that, please?
Yeah. So I think that certainly in the Canadian context, we have a great source of innovation, many great sources of innovation in that Waterloo to Montreal corridor down the 401 and the 40. That we are working hard across government to tap into, to make sure that we are able to sort of stay plugged into what's the latest and greatest on a lot of this stuff. I think going back to my opening comments a little bit, on the government side, the issue is really around policy. The technology is available, the potential is there. We get in our own way because our policy frameworks are often have been set for a long time and are not easy to change. I think particularly in the security space, which is what I'm quite familiar with, we've got information management security and physical security and personnel security standards that still have a very strong tang of the Cold War to them. We need to be much more flexible in how we view these things in a world where the technology is changing fast, and the rules can change around us, and our policy frameworks don't allow us to adjust. So I think in terms of that relationship with industry, what we've been putting a lot of emphasis on is the need to be adaptable on the policy side. And what I'm looking for with industry is multiple overlapping relationships, frankly. I don't want to have one major partner. I want to have multiple partners in different areas. I want to have the flexibility to go where the best ideas are. So whether that's through some of the more academic style think tanks in places like HEC in Montreal or in Waterloo and whatnot, or if that's much more industry targeted, I think is sort of an open question, but I want to have the flexibility to go where the answers are.
Well, that's also kind of interesting, speaking about the academic think tanks and so forth, and those that are doing research in our universities is another good question of partnerships. So, Jean, just to close off this issue of relationships with industry, you're the one that mentioned it first, so I'll give you a few minutes if you'd like to just give us a few details of how you see relations with industry in France. Philippe, vous.
I fully support what was shared by my comrades. Just maybe a compliment on that. We view the technological companies as a part of an ecosystem, a cyber ecosystem that is national, but could also be considered on a larger scale in the framework of an alliance, and primarily we think the European Union. And because those tech companies are part of this ecosystem, we definitely need to have a robust relationship and mutually beneficial relationship with them. That includes career paths for our human resource. No one so far has completed a full career in the field of cyber defense, because cyber defense is so new, but we have a sense that I'm sorry, I have some light problem here on my side. We have a sense that we're going to see more and more of careers starting with us, working for the government in cyber defense, and going back to the private sectors, and potentially keeping a link with us. But would it be through military reserve, or would it be by the fact that those people who have started with us went to the private sector could at some point come back to working for the government? We are concerned with protection of secrets, because what they've learned with us, we would not like them to be able to share it in the private sector, or not completely at least. So we need the laws on protection of secrets, of national secrets, to be fully enforced, to make sure that those career paths are going to stay smooth and safe for us in terms of protection of secrets. That's my few thoughts on it.
Thank you very much. And obviously, we can see that the use of fossil fuels is having a real impact on France. The lights have come off and everything. So I want to talk now a little bit about artificial intelligence. And we touched on artificial intelligence a number of times kind of on the side. But I'd like the panelists' view of the importance, the impact of artificial intelligence on military operations specifically in the future. Mr. Burt, please.
Yeah, so let's talk broadly about AI. I mean, I think AI is one of a spectrum of what I consider to be data-driven technologies. And again, going back to my opening comments, it becomes really important to make sure you've got your data sorted before you start applying algorithms to it in order to see what you're going to get at the other side. And the other reality about AI is that 90% of AI is statistical regression models, right? Like, this is not actually rocket science. It's the repeated application of stats to a data set. So it's I don't know if you've seen that picture that's doing the rounds on Twitter and other social media of the three actors dressed in various styles of sort of flamboyance. I think I can't remember, it's Lady Gaga and someone else, and then what's his name, who was in the last round of Star Wars movies, but he's in a dark suit, sort of like this, and then the other two are sort of dressed up, and the one that I saw in the AI space was artificial intelligence, machine learning, statistics, and that's basically what we're talking about here. This is there is a challenge in this space, particularly with senior level policymakers, because they don't really understand what they're talking about on some of this stuff. It goes to the comments that were made, but in someone else's remarks about the need to be able to wrap your head around these issues. The numeracy and comfort with technology and ability to sort of peek behind the curtain when you're talking about things like digital and not let it actually be more specific in what it is that you're talking about is really important. It's becoming a core competency, and it's one which I think at senior levels in big organizations is a challenge, because people fundamentally aren't comfortable with that. It's no longer going to be acceptable, in my view, for whether they're policymakers or politicians or whatnot, to not understand what's actually happening in the black box on this on these kinds of technology models. So that's going to be an interesting challenge from an education standpoint. I think from a military capability standpoint, the same thing. The same dynamic is coming into play now. And what I'm seeing when I look at the Canadian Armed Forces is that you've got a bunch of senior level people who know that we need to change and adapt AI and other digital and data-driven technologies. They don't really understand it, but they know we need to do it. There's a bunch of people at the junior level who are coming in now, whether they're non-commissioned or commissioned, who actually do understand it, because frankly, from the time I was in school doing social sciences and had to hold my nose through a stats course to what they make people do now, there's a world of difference. People are actually coming out of these programs with a much better grounding in methodology. And there's a bunch of people in the middle who don't understand the imperative and don't want to do it. And pushing, from a military capability standpoint, pushing stuff through that group in the middle so that we actually can change how we're doing these things and change the way we run our business, which in the broadest sense of the word, how we run the business of defense is really where the challenge space is in here.
Oh, that's another very interesting point, and it talks to the importance of education within this as well. I'm going to ask the opinion of Philippe and then Tim on artificial intelligence, so that we can get a broad view and get the comparison between the three approaches. So, Philippe, à vous.
think artificial intelligence and cyber in France, clearly we think about ciphering and deciphering, but also exploiting data collected through cyber operations. There's a difference in nature between the data that you could process from signal intelligence, for instance, and from cyber intelligence. And clearly, because cyber is such a powerful tool when collecting intelligence, we need to develop the right IA tools to process it. So that's our current focus, and we also try to identify where AI capabilities are spread between intelligence agencies, other places in the government, and potentially the private sector.
Over to you.
Thanks. AI on military operations and looking to the future, there is a tendency that everyone automatically leaps to the high end of AI and the human being replicated. And I simply think we have more time than perhaps some predict. I see a growing use and demand for automation and a growth in machine learning, and then you will start seeing the sort of the growth of AI. But also, there's an awful lot of AI that will be employed within military operations, which will actually come directly from the private sector. And it's already with us. So if I look at auto translation tools that we might be using in any facet of business, be that defense or in the intelligence world, or just being able to deal with a partner from another nation, then that automated translation, that AI-driven translation, is already quite mature and will continue to mature because society will demand it thus to be able to tear down the Tower of Babel. So I can see the use of AI on military ops in a relatively safe, governed fashion happening fairly swiftly, and actually they will be the test cases to make sure we're doing things in a safe and responsible fashion. So I talked about auto translation, predictive maintenance. The AI that will be used to tell me how serviceable a military jet engine is going to be very, very similar to that I would see on a commercial airliner. So I think there will be huge opportunities in that perspective. In the cybersecurity realm, the automation of defence, governed defensive action, I can see being a huge growth area. If something looks like an attack and feels like an attack, even though I haven't necessarily seen the hash and this particular threat before, behave like it is an attack, but behave in a safe fashion to that attack. And the other area where I would see AI being used in relative swift fashion is actually through our commercial partners. We don't do everything in-house. And so sifting through the realms of open source data that exists out there, publicly available information, commercially available information, AI is already being employed by our commercial partners to do so. So effectively, we're using AI by proxy. And again, I will see that as a step forward. And I think the challenge there, from a military perspective, from a leadership perspective, is always to remember we're not getting after AI for AI's sake. AI is there for a business-driven and operationally driven challenge and purpose. And therefore, we can actually put the governance and tailored governance of the use of AI specifically around that business challenge. And you adapt and you introduce AI when those ethics, that process and those principles are well established. Will we have to get after it? Absolutely. Do I see humans staying in the loop of that, though? Also, absolutely. Individuals will either be within the value chain of the execution of that business or operational process, so there will be a human in the loop. But more importantly, in terms of the accountability for AI, be that introduction of an algorithm, or the use of it in practice, there will have to be a human that is ultimately held accountable and has shown that their use of that AI is assured before it's actually brought out there. And how do we get after that? Well, like the other speakers before me, the UK is developing its AI strategy from a military perspective. Ethics and legal areas are absolutely front and centre to that evolving strategy. So it's with us. It will increasingly be so, but actually I think it can be safely governed in terms of its introduction.
Thank you very much. And so our last topic is one that you raised, Tim, in your remarks, talking about the transition from the analog world to the digital world, and knowing that we've still got many systems and operations and capabilities that are analog and moving, and we are in the digital world today. So I'd like to hear a little bit more on your thoughts from you, Tim, first, and then Philippe, and then we'll close off with Stephen here in Canada. So Tim, over to you.
Thanks. And I think I would go back to my earlier comments in terms of the transition from the analog to the digital world. Is don't forget there's an awful lot that will continue to be analog. We might use the electromagnetic spectrum in a digital fashion, and for the employment of technologies like 5G. However, the spectrum is ultimately an analog system and needs to be governed as such. So I think there is a real danger, UK expression, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, that we see analog as yesterday's news. It's not. The digital age has to adapt for use of both analog and digital technologies. Also, looking at the cybersecurity perspective in particular, you forget resilience at your peril. And I think one of the greatest opportunities for resilience is having those reversionary modes to some of those technologies. They might not be the standard. They might not have the data rates that digital systems can deliver to us. But my goodness me, they give us a fallback mechanism, which is absolutely crucial in my business in particular, the security and the defence sector. So I think the challenge for me is analog and digital being a symbiotic relationship rather than necessarily a competitive relationship.
Thank you very much. Général de Montenon, puis-je avoir votre perspective, s'il vous plaît?
Yeah, when thinking about movement from analogic to digital world, some of the thoughts we have is we see digitizations as a blessing. Obviously, we're going to have a lot of benefits from it. Would it be for medicine, for autonomous vehicles, and things like that of our daily life? Probably going to save life. Also going to expose us to more vulnerabilities. Anything digital is vulnerable to cyber. And one of the things we try to promote as the French Cyber Command, responsible for defending all weapon systems of the Minister of Armed Forces, is whenever we move from an analogic to digitized weapon system, we try to make sure that the cybersecurity of this new system has been fully established and planned before it is put into service. Otherwise, we think we're in danger. That's about the extent of what I would like to say.
Thank you very much. And Stephen, over to you.
Yeah, I think it's a key point when you have conferences like this or set up organizations like mine and the Defense Department. We're not doing this for fun. We're not doing AI for AI's sake, as Tim said. We're not fascinated by digital because we just think it's really cool. This is about doing things for business-driven purposes. I think the important thing at the end of the day is find the business problem that you've got, be specific as you can, then find the right tools to fix it. Those business tools might be digital, they might be AI, they might be I think there are many problems in the world from a defense standpoint that still require 10 door kickers with heavy weaponry to actually go through and blow up something. That may be the right response to the problem set you've got. So we've got to think about what it is you're trying to solve and make sure that you've got the right suite of tools to do that, from high tech to low tech. And I think the point on resiliency is really well taken as well. We need to make sure that we have fallbacks, and in many cases, the human interaction piece and the need to actually resolve things in the physical world is actually where this stuff comes together. I'll leave it there.
OK, thank you very much. Alors, merci beaucoup à tous nos panélistes. Merci beaucoup aussi à nos participants, nos gens ici à Ottawa et ceux qui nous écoutent virtuellement. Your panelist participation remarks and answers to questions have helped us to understand the subject better and compared the approach taken in NATO in different countries. And I found it very fascinating to see the convergence of views and where there are slight variations. So thank you to our panelists for giving of your time, your energy, and your intelligence. Alors, n'oubliez pas que demain, nous allons tenir notre deuxième journée sur le sujet. Il sera intéressant de voir l'approche prônée par l'industrie sur la digitalisation. Be sure to join us tomorrow and we'll discuss the impact of digitalization on private industry. And I'm now going to turn it over to our co-host, Mr. Brett Kitchen, publisher of Canadian Defence Review magazine, to close off day one of our summit. Brett?
Thanks, General. First off, I would like to take a moment to thank everyone who took the time to register and attend day one of this special summit. And of course, our keynote speaker, NATO Secretary General, Mr. Joanna. CDR is extremely proud to be the media partner of the summit and help play a role in fostering a dialogue that addresses the unique challenges that a digital world presents to both NATO and its allies. I would also like to take this moment to thank our title sponsors, NATO and Thales, for their support of the event, as well as sponsors General Dynamics Mission System, Calian, and our technology partners, Modestry and Distantly, as well as DAFOCOM and Neptune Cyber, who have all been instrumental in making this summit possible. With that said, I would like to officially declare day one of our summit now closed, and I would like to also consider day one a resounding success, and we are eagerly anticipating tomorrow's dialogue with our industry speakers. Please make sure to join us tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp. Thank you.
The physical world and the digital world are no longer two separate things. All of the physical things that drive our nation forward now operate in the digital world. This is the cyber domain. And there are so many benefits. The ability to connect, to communicate, to collect, analyze, and share information anytime, anywhere. But with these benefits come threats. General Dynamics Mission Systems Canada is uniquely positioned to usher in the future of cybersecurity, helping governments protect their citizens and operate securely in the cyber domain. We understand that cyber protection requires always-on, active monitoring of the entire domain. Dynamic protection built into key components in critical operations. Defensive systems that actively learn and autonomously respond to keep us one step ahead of the threats. There is simply no one product or technology that can do all of this. The problem space is more complex than that. This means understanding the operation or mission first before selecting the right technologies and partners so that integrated solutions are relevant and adaptable. As a systems integrator, General Dynamics has the experience and leadership to help governments build smarter and more robust cyber ecosystems. We've been doing exactly that for decades, so we're ready. Ready to match the threat with experience, commitment, and agility. Ready to collaborate with governments, academia, and industry for best-of-breed technology. Ready to deliver innovation through sovereign, integrated cyber solutions. We're ready to defend Canada and its allies from cyber threats today and in the future.